Thank you very much, Dr. Nesca. And I also want to thank uh, the principal, Peter Mandal, Ms. Debelina Das, the head of English, and all of whom have been instrumental in getting this seminar, this conference together. It's in some respects an unusual topic, but it's very, very topical. I was thinking that there are many ways in which we could address the issue of violence, because of course both Australia and India have been subjected to the violence of imperialism, and of course India has been left with a very sorry legacy in the partition that was made by the British administration, and the repercussions of that continue to the present day. I want to just mention one form of violence which I won't be talking about in my lecture, and that is the slow violence of the poor. A slow violence that is caused by the environmental degradation that was originally started by the imperial maritime empires across the world, devastating the environment and introducing monocultural crops. And I think that is one form of violence that we need to remind ourselves about. But today I'm going to talk about something more hopeful. I'm going to talk about the way in which conflict can lead to transformation. Now I'm going to share my screen. Right. Can't share my screen. Oh, terrific. Jeez. All right. I'm now sadly I always seem to have problems with Google Meet. The window. That's better. Okay. All right. I want to talk about conflict and transformation. Now, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, you're loud and clear.
Okay, good. Now, Martin Luther King, this is probably a statement you all are familiar with. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And that bend towards justice is something that motivates my talk today. Slavoj Žižek says, I'm a pessimist in the sense that we are approaching dangerous times. Well, in fact, we are in the middle of dangerous times. But I'm an optimist for exactly the same reason. Pessimism means things are getting messy. Optimism means these are precisely the times when change is possible. And that motive is something that drives this talk, because I want to talk about hope. I want to talk about the possibility of change in the long view. Now, we are living in terribly, terribly violent times, and we have the genocide of Palestinian people, Ukraine, Iran. It seems that governments almost feel obliged to be violent towards each other. I'm particularly concerned about the violence of domination, and I want to suggest a way of approaching violence by looking at the long view, the long picture, a picture of hope. Now, the 20th century was the most violent in history. And it seems as though this century is quickly overtaking it because of the stupidity, vindictiveness of national leaders who will remain nameless. The, the, the world is in a very bad state. A conflict is always a struggle for power. And this struggle for power is something that human beings can't seem to shake off. Now, Edward Said contended that the intellectual writer and artist speak truth to power. And this is the source of something I want to suggest in terms of the way of speaking truth to power. Art and literature speak truth to power by speaking beyond it. Now, to a lot of us at this time, it'll seem pretty futile. How can we intercede in the violence that is occurring in the world today? I want to take a couple of examples of that violence and suggest that there are ways in which we can look beyond it. I want to see resistance in terms of transformation. Transformation is a much more powerful form of resistance than simple opposition. And my book, Post-Colonial Transformation, discusses this at length. But there is a saying in literary circles, the book and the barricade, the book or the barricade. Will literature change the world, or do we need to have military resistance, violent resistance? I want to put forward the possibility of creative arts and literature in particular, of giving a view of the world that can change people's minds. W.H. Auden says, poetry changes nothing. And nevertheless, creativity generates hope. And that's the hope that will get us through the violence that seems to be setting the world. Because what hope does is look beyond the present. It looks beyond it to the possibility of a different world. Now, Mahmoud Darwish says, here on the slopes facing the sunset and the cannon mouth of time, near orchards stripped of their shadows, we do what prisoners do, we do what the unemployed do, we cultivate hope. And I want to suggest that hope is one of the most powerful tools facing those who are the victims of violence. Creativity is the act of stepping beyond. And this is how newness enters the world, as Salman Rushdie says. Newness enters the world because we step beyond through the creative work. Simply by imagining the world differently, the creative work shows the possibility of a different world. Now, this is something very close to my heart, the power of creative work to change the world we see, the way we see the world. And I think that this is the way in which we can suggest a strategy to get beyond the violence of the world today. Now, Paul Ricoeur says, may we not say then that the imagination itself, through the utopian function, has a constitutive role in helping us to rethink the nature of our social life? Is not utopia, this leap outside, the way in which we radically rethink what is family, what is consumption, what is authority, what is religion, and so on? Does not the fantasy of an alternative society and its exteriorization nowhere work as one of the most formidable contestations of what is? Now, a lot of us will think that utopia is the word for a vain, wishful thinking. But Ernst Bloch and Paul Ricoeur suggest that without hope, life is not possible. But Ricoeur says of this utopia that it exists nowhere. Now, nowhere is the only place from which ideology can be critiqued. This is Mannheim's paradox. He said that ideology cannot be critiqued from within ideology because it cannot escape it. One form of ideology cannot speak to another unless in terms of opposition and violence. So nowhere is the only place in which ideology can be critiqued. Now, in a lecture that he gave back in the 30s, Ernst Bloch said, "Can hope be disappointed?" And he said, well, yes, hope can be disappointed, but it cannot be destroyed. Hope will triumph. For Bloch, art and literature have a particular function for projecting into the future. Vorschein, the anticipatory illumination of a different world, and Heimat, the home we have all sensed but have not yet experienced. Now, there is a danger here that we fall into the trap of thinking, well, this is just pie in the sky. But what I want to sort of reiterate is that Bloch says certainly a utopia as a place may be an illusion, but without hope, we cannot live. Without hope, we cannot overcome the violence of the world. So I want to see resistance as transformation. I want to see the transformation as the most powerful form of resistance. And this idea of the home we have not yet seen, but we know it's up ahead, the home of peace, the home of resolution, is the thing that gives us hope for getting through the violence of the world. In State of Siege, Darwish says, to resist means to be confident of the health of your heart and of your balls, to be confident of your incurable malady, the malady of hope. Now, Ghassan Kanafani, Palestinian author, insists on an integral relationship between armed resistance and culture. And we see that in the world today. But this, I want to suggest, is a trap, because the oppressors lock the oppressed into a binary opposition. The oppressors lock the oppressed into a form of resistance which simply mimics the oppression that they've been placed under. The way in which we get out of this is through transformation. And a transformation of resistance through language is nowhere better demonstrated than in the Caribbean. The Caribbean produced a totally different language to give a sense of a different kind of future. The Caribbean slaves overcame the terrible conditions of slavery. They overcame the ways in which slave owners put them in different language groups, mixed up their original languages, so that they might not be able to form a resistance to slavery. And what happened? Well, the Caribbean speakers, the Caribbean slaves, generated a different kind of hybrid language. So I want to talk about a way in which art can look beyond the terrible violence of not just colonialism, but also of slavery and of invasion. Now, Lynn Onus is an artist who adopts Western art forms. And post-colonial artists like him, working from the in-between space of hybridization, grapple with the reality of violence, appropriating dominant technologies while transforming approaches to nation, race and history. And in light of this, I want to remind us of the amazing way in which South Asian intellectuals, forced to learn English, appropriated that English and made it work for them, representing themselves. And in this way, Indian writers changed the nature of English literature. Now, the borderline work of culture demands an encounter with newness that is not part of the continuum of past and present. It creates a sense of the new as an insurgent act of cultural translation. Such art does not merely recall the past as a social cause or aesthetic precedent, it renews the past, refiguring it as a contingent in-between space that innovates and interrupts the performance of the present, as Homi Bhabha says. So this idea of newness is one that can be a powerful antidote to the despair brought on by violence. Now, this is Linonis, whose art is very interesting. His art is meta-representational. That is, what his art does is describe the process of representation. Now here, this is a painting called Twice Upon a Time. And we see the visual section in the center, a representation of Western art form, laid over the carved wood, the carved tree, the Aboriginal sense of art. Now, so what we've got here in talking about representation is talking about the way in which Western art forms are placed over the top of the Aboriginal, and that barbed wire that goes across the painting is both a representation of the carving up of land as property and of the imprisoning of Aboriginal people. The carving up of property turned Aboriginal land into farms that were that the new arrivals said were the first time that the land had been used, which of course was nonsense. So then this is the original. This is why it's called Twice Upon a Time. This is Evening Shadows, backwater of the Murray. So you see how this has been represented in Linonis's painting, and this is his way of contesting the violence of Aboriginal devastation, I suppose. Here's another interesting painting. It looks purely Western, but it's in the form of a jigsaw, and we see the pieces of the jigsaw don't fit. They just don't fit the spaces that they're meant to be put into. And this is a very cunning and very subtle demonstration of the inadequacy of Western forms of representation in the Aboriginal world. But rather than reject it, Linonis takes hold of it and makes the Western art form work for him in particular ways. This is called On the Eighth Day. Now we know in the Bible, God created the world in 7 days. On the seventh day, he created Adam and Eve. And on the 8th day, the angels brought the sheep, barbed wire, the gun, the Bible, and that red thing that's being held is a toilet duck, a different form of cleanliness. So on the 8th day, but want to talk about the way in which we can overcome the devastation of the present. Edouard Glissant talks about a prophetic vision of the past. Post-colonial literatures continually affirm this sense of the future in the past. And Darwish says, I believe that the unwavering commitment to resistance and defense is not some sort of nostalgia, but the saturation of the present and the future with the past, without which neither present nor future will come to be. Ernst Bloch says the in front of us is always a possibility emerging from the past, not as nostalgia, but as renewal. And I think this is the key to this whole notion of the power of the past. It's not nostalgia for what has been, it's a using the prophetic vision of the past as a way into the future. And I think this is a powerful transformation that contests the violence of imperialism, the violence of colonialism. And Edward Kummer Brathwaite talks about the limbo dance. Limbo like me, long dark deck and the water surrounding me, long dark deck and the silence is over me. Now the limbo dance is a recapitulation of the history of the slave being brought over the Middle Passage. Now, we know that there was a triangular trade, which ships brought material from Britain to Africa, to West Africa, took slaves from Africa across to the Caribbean, and took sugar and molasses and rum from the Caribbean back to Europe. Now, the limbo dance, which the Caribbean people engage in constantly, is a constant reminder of not just the past that they have endured, but the fact that they come out at the end free. So past, present, future are conjoined in the creative work in a radical transformation of the reality of slave exile. Now, I go back to this painting by Linonis, which I think is possibly the perfect demonstration of Glissant's prophetic vision of the past. Now, the road to Redfern. Now, Redfern is a Sydney suburb, which is a large Aboriginal population and a large and active resistance population in the city. You see the red, yellow and black colours are the colours of the Aboriginal flag. In the rear vision mirror, you see the rainbow serpent. So driving into Redfern, driving into political resistance, we have the rainbow serpent. The past is bringing us towards freedom. So the prophetic vision of the past is just embodied in this painting. Now, another region which, of course, is being devastated at the moment. I want to talk about Palestine. Now, some may think this is kind of futile because what's happening in Palestine is extraordinary. It's genocide, quite simply. But Gaza isn't the only part of Palestine. There is, of course, the West Bank, which is also being attacked, but much more subtly. But here's a poster brought out by Franz Krauss called Visit Palestine. It was brought out in 1936. And for Palestinians, the original Visit Palestine, published by the Tourist Development Association of Palestine in 1936, has come to be seen as an iconic reminder of their historical presence in the Holy Land. Reproductions of the poster have found their way into Palestinian homes and businesses around the world. Now, 1936 was period before what is called the Nakba, the catastrophe of Jewish entry into Palestine and the taking over of Palestinian homes and land. And to this day, Palestinians have very often the key to their home around around their neck to demonstrate the fact that their homes were invaded and taken over, and literally their houses were taken over by the incoming Zionists. Now, Amar Shamali in Visit Palestine puts this transformation of the poster. It's an appropriation of Franz Krauss's poster, part of what is described as the recruit Zion genre. Shamali presents a sharply satiric commentary on the current restrictions on Palestinians from visiting Jerusalem or the Dome of the Rock. So the land which they were living in before it was invaded is now cut off and barred for them. So when we think about the future, when we think about overcoming the violence of our condition, there's a time to think about utopia and utopianism. Now, Kumar says if something is to abide, endure, then its past may never be simply past, but must in some way also remain present. By the same token, its future must already be somehow contained in its present. Now, this seems like a very obscure philosophical point, but it's an incredibly important point for people who believe that their past has been taken away from them. Because the past, the present moment, is not a point in time, but a process. The present moment, this present moment now, is already the future taking over the past moving into the future. So primarily, says Bloch, everybody lives in the future because they strive. Function and content of hope are experienced continuously, and in times of rising societies, they have been continuously activated and extended. And of course, he means by rising societies in times of revolutions. Now, when we think about the sort of violence that is going on in Gaza, for instance, we might think this is somewhat futile. But nevertheless, I want to suggest that hope cannot be destroyed. Hope is always there to demonstrate the possibility of a different world. Heimat is not paradise, but it is a place to live. So the Palestinian Revolution is a grounded rather than transcendental utopia. It's grounded utopias both emerge organically out of and contribute to further development of historical movements for grassroots change. As a result, they are emphatically not fantasized visions of perfection to be imposed upon an imperfect world, but an integral feature of that world, representing the hopes and dreams of those consigned to its margins. And we see the hope, the grounded utopia of Palestine is indefeatable, undefeatable, even though it seems to be in the dire straits at the moment. I mean, we can't even begin to talk about the inhumanity and terror that's being worked out in Gaza. The transformative resistance, though, takes hold of representation, avoiding victimhood and rethinking the future. Now, I think this is critical. Then in the resistance to violence, it's important to avoid the temptation to be a victim, of victimhood, and rethink the future. Now, Naji Ali was a Palestinian artist and cartoonist. I love his work. This is the pen, and the possibility of the pen throwing light. The pen is a candle. The pen can throw light on the future. Now, this little fellow is called Hamdal, and he appears constantly looking at different aspects of Palestinian life, and his representations of hope must have been regarded extremely important by the Israeli authorities, because Naji al-Ali was assassinated in London. And so I say that to suggest that, we think that creative work is futile and hopeless, but in fact it has a power that we cannot understand the complete depth of. When Moshe Dayan talked about Palestinian writing, he said, I felt as though it was a platoon of commandos facing me. He looked at the representation, he looked at creative writing as a soldier and saw that it is powerful. Now, while Auden says poetry changes nothing, nevertheless, art and literature, by giving a vision of a different kind of world, can impact on the violence that people are subjected to. Now, Larissa Sansa is a Palestinian who's given an image of a different kind of Palestine, one in which Jerusalem and the West Bank and Gaza are part of the same building. Now, for Palestine's, the original Figures of Palestine, published by the Tourist Development Association, has come to be seen as an iconic reminder of their historical presence. So it's a very powerful thing, a prophetic vision of the past. Reproductions of the poster have found their way into Palestinian homes and businesses around the world, as I said. So we've seen Shamali. This is nation estate. Now, that building, playing on the British use of the term estate for tower block housing, sounds or depicts a virtual Palestinian homeland in the form of a skyscraper, dwarfing the real Palestine outside. This project stirred controversy when, after being shortlisted for the prestigious Musée de Elysée Art Prize in Switzerland, the major donor sponsor, Lacoste, requested that the work be removed from the competition for being too pro-Palestinian. After the ensuing international scandal, the museum cancelled the prize and broke off partnership with Lacoste. I mean, it's quite far-fetched to regard artwork by a Palestinian as being too pro-Palestinian. But this shows what the actual power of creative work, the power to change minds, to give a vision of a possible future. This is her building, floor 1, the lobby, then Souk, Jerusalem, Ramallah, Bethlehem, all on different floors. And the same again. And the tree that is growing in the building is an olive tree, a Palestinian cultivation, and a sign of the possibility of the future. So Sansour takes this possibility even further to suggest a Palestinian landing on the moon, which is of course, fanciful, but it's her space exodus that she's demonstrating. And what Sansura is doing is showing that when you're uh, trying to capture the possibility of a different kind of future, sky is the limit, the moon is the limit. And so the creative works we see here are not involved in conflict in the way we normally expect revolution to occur, or in Kanafani's idea of resistance literature, but they are revolutionary in their capacity to collapse time, to fuse past, present, and future into the image that spirals into the future. There are different forms of revolution, but all must reject the stereotype of victimhood. And these works are transformative in their disruption of stereotype, their rejection of fear, their undercutting of expectation. Ultimately, they demonstrate the utopian power of art and literature because they affirm that a different world is possible. Creative works confirm a fundamental truth of revolution, that no future is achieved unless it is first imagined. Thank you very much. So,
Um, Thank you so much, sir, for that wonderful keynote address. Well, in keynote addresses, we normally don't have questions, but since we have a global icon in the middle of us, uh, no way we can sort of skip that. So my brother Phalguni, he has a question first. He will, you know, address his question first, and then I will sort of take on the floor. And then Bulina and Sharonota, I would request you to frame your questions in the meantime, so that you can ask them
okay,
to
yes.
Professor Panchla.
I'll take a
Yes.
couple of questions and 6 minutes worth. Okay.
Hello, sir. It's my honor to ask a question to you. And the question is, how can art meet praxis with ideology in the resistance towards violence?
Now, this is a question that crops up all the time. I once talked about this in a talk about looking for Australia, and an Aboriginal woman got up and said, "Art can do nothing; only justice can work." And what I would say is that for justice to occur, you must conceive it. And the way in which we can best conceive a possible future is through the creative act, the creative work of art and literature. Now, I know it seems futile, and certainly if you're being shot at and killed, it doesn't seem to be very effective. But what I'm talking about is the long view. What I'm talking about is the capacity to avoid being sucked into a simple oppositional response of being sucked into the idea that you're a victim. Okay. Now we have at the moment some contestation. Well, at the moment, I mean, India and Pakistan have been hammer and tongs for many years, and the the way in which that can be resolved, I think. Let's imagine that we have the uh, concept of a different kind of relationship, the concept of a different ruling of the Kashmir, say. I think this is the way in which it's only by imagining a different future that that things can be changed. Now, I know it doesn't happen in the short term. I know that if someone is shooting at you, this is not going to be useful. But what I'm talking about is the big picture. I'm talking about the big picture of the post-colonial, because that itself, the overcoming of imperial violence, was a long, long view, but is still working itself out. But it's a positive, and it will achieve self-determination.
Yes, that is actually true, isn't it? That art has such a quality to sort of really negotiate with the past to form your ideas. Sir, what we can do is we can take two questions simultaneously from Professor Sharanushen and Debulina Dash. If you have questions, please put that through Debulina first and then Sharanudha, and then I think Sir can sort of answer them together.
So this is more of an observation, not a question. So you talk about how the idea of utopia has to be imagined before we can reach it. So this is something we see in literature come up again and again. I'm reminded of a film called Mad Max. It's a post-apocalyptic film by George Miller, where a bunch of women they leave the home of a tyrant in order to find their utopia. They travel thousands of miles through the desert only to realize that utopia does not exist. They must go back to the dictator, dismantle him, and form their own utopia. So when you talk about your imagined homelands, that's what I was reminded of.
Right. Yes. Yes. That's a good point. Heimat, as Ernst Bloch conceives it, is uh, not even. It may not be realizable, but it's always there, and that fact that it's there changes the present. This is the whole point about utopia and dystopia, that the perception of these things changes the present because it gives us hope. Without hope, we cannot live. And with hope, we can see a different kind of future is possible. And I do believe that um, the future is a different future is possible in the Middle East, in Ukraine, in South Asia. So we just need to, yeah, to keep believing that, because if we don't imagine a different world, if we can't imagine it, and we refuse to imagine it, then it won't happen. And so what I'm saying is there's a real power in the creative work. There's a real power in literature and the work of the imagination.
Yeah, so we can perhaps take one last question from Professor Sharanushen. Sharanudha, if we can sort of put through your question.
Thank you, Nilanjan. Sir, first of all, it was really heartening to see that you brought in so much of South Asia, so much of India in your talk. In my country nowadays, that enlightenment project of the divorce between the church and the state, that seems to be blurring. The religious leaders are talking more about politics, and the political leaders are talking more about religion. And both of them put together, they are causing the violence to perpetuate itself beyond measure. As my question is from the perspective of a teacher, sir, what do we teachers do in our classrooms as teachers of literature? How do we engage with bringing back the fundamental political questions, giving them their rightful space, and keeping the state and the church separate? Because that, I guess, is the need of the hour.
Yes.
I'm looking for a suggestion from you, sir, on this.
Okay. Well, this is a question all of us teachers are still asking ourselves. All I can say is that in my teaching, I try to open the possible future to students. They need to think of it themselves, of course, but they can do it by seeing the ways in which a different world is imagined. Now, what Bloch says, of course, is that it doesn't have to be, literature doesn't have to be utopian or even, optimistic. But one of the fundamental things about it, it does show a different world. A different world is possible. And once we understand that a different world is possible, then we can understand that it is achievable. And the achievement of a different world is something that gives us hope and drives us forward. Now, I find that students connect to this idea very, very quickly, and they, tend to be extremely insightful in the way in which they see this thing. But of course, there's another thing you mentioned, the religious leaders been political and politicians have been religious. And I just want to say that the combination of religion and politics is the most toxic combination possible, because religion gives us the sacred right to be violent to our opponent. And so what I think we need to do is just warn people about this. You know, we can be quite religious ourselves, but to make your religion the excuse for your politics, it's absolutely disastrous and most toxic mix. So I just think that if we can encourage students to keep these things separate, and also to see that the utopia is not necessarily a religious or a political possibility, but it could be both. And you know, the thing is, by being a possibility, it changes the present. That's the important message of this block. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. So maybe we can have just one last observation from you before we call it a day. Sir, as I said that, I was attending this workshop with Professor Homi Bhabha in the New School at the New York City, and he was talking about the whole disproportionality which is associated with the violence in Gaza, because surely there was an October 7th where the Hamas had attacked the Israeli citizens. But in response to that, what the Israel state did was to sort of enter into a state of ethnic cleansing, a total ethnic cleansing. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that and the whole disproportionality of violence in that region.
Yes, very much. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. We're breaking up a bit there, but I do get the essence of it. The point about, yeah, what you're saying is quite true. Violence comes about because of the disproportionality of belief, right? And also violence comes about because people feel threatened by alternative views. And if a person feels threatened, then they respond violently. I don't know how, honestly, I don't know how we can resolve the idea that the disproportionality of violence, except to say that we need to be aware of it. And that reminds me of, Althusser says that we are all sort of born into ideology, okay? But that doesn't mean that we can't see it. You know, we are born into ideology, but it doesn't mean we can't reflect on it. And I think that that's crucial for avoiding violence, because violence is at its core ideological. And the search for power is the search to let your ideology dominate. So, yeah, I think that the teaching students to see how ideology is affecting them is an incredibly valuable thing, incredibly important. And that will overcome disproportionality, I believe.
Well, thank you so much, sir, for your very intriguing and intellectually stimulating a talk. I really can't thank you enough. In fact, I'm still thinking whether this is a dream or reality that we are actually interacting with the Professor Bill Ashcroft. But thank you so much, sir, for your very kind presence.
Thank you for organizing this conference.